Hey, welcome to Beyond Organic Wine. I'm Adam Huss, coming to you from the Wine Forest Farm in Spencer, New York. Thank you so much for listening. If you're listening for the first time, Beyond Organic Wine is a kind of unique podcast in that I look at wine from an ecological perspective. That means I ask how wine can be a living culture that grows from its local geography, that evolves from its relationships within the complexity of ecosystems that make it possible, that fits into the community of life. And I ask how we can use wine to add to the health and beauty and resilience of everything that it touches. In many ways, this podcast, which is also a Substack at beyondorganicwine.substack.com, is about how we can rebuild our wine cultures out of the ruins of the monoculture we inherited at the beginning of the 21st century. The people I interview and the topics I cover all work toward this rebuilding, this regeneration of wine. This is implicitly hopeful work. To plant a tree, to plant a vine, to plant a flower, to build a culture. These are acts of hope. And I've come to believe hope is action. Working hard at complex problems in an effort to create beautiful things that enhance all of our lives and make them worth living. This is hope. Listening, too, is an act of hope. Listening to the earth, to each other. Listening to be able to get guidance about how to act, listening to the members of our communities who might speak in ways that transcend our language, listening to the members of our communities who are angry for good reason, even if they don't know what those reasons are. Listening, rather than gazing into the mirrors of our screens, may be the most hopefully revolutionary act we can do right now, and coincidentally, might be the best way to increase the resilience and deliciousness of our wine. So thank you for listening. There are so many good things going on. This episode is really exciting, maybe even game-changing for anyone in viticulture. And I'll get to that next because I'm also really excited about the upcoming Embracing Hybrid Grapes in California conference at UC Davis on January 26, 2026. It seems like more exciting things develop with this every week. We have some incredible speakers and panelists that you can see at embracinghybridgrapes.com now. And we have some incredible sponsors there too. And we will be tasting something like a couple dozen wines from all over the world, some from California, made with hybrids. The point of this day is to give anyone in wine in California some amazing exposure to the varieties, flavors, and potentials of an array of hybrid wine grapes, as well as practical and data-based information about the benefits and opportunities of implementing hybrids in your wine growing and winemaking. We will announce a schedule later this week, and there's going to be a lot happening over the next couple weeks, in addition to the holidays. But a lot going on with Embracing Hybrid Grapes. And you can get tickets for Embracing Hybrid Grapes at UC Davis on January 26, 2026. You can get tickets at embracinghybridgrapes.com. Now, of all the amazing things that I've learned and the incredible people that I've been inspired by this year, this episode may turn out to be the most mind-blowing of them all. What if I told you that you could take a piece of degraded, marginal land with 3.5 pH soils and turn it into an agricultural production system with 5 times the productivity of neighboring conventional farms without using any fertilizer or pesticides or outside inputs besides sunlight, seeds, and plants? What if I told you that there are decades of data to support this, and that it can be done anywhere, and that this system makes grapes more productive, healthier, and more delicious? Erik is the commercial horticulture and natural resources educator at Cornell Cooperative Extension. He runs Black Creek Farm and Nursery in the Hudson Valley of New York, and he's implementing a commercial-scale married vine, or vitiforestry polyculture there at Black Creek Farm and Nursery. If you don't know what married vines are, it means growing vines on and with living trees as they're trellising. But I prefer to think of it as the three sisters of perennial agriculture, in the sense that I don't think the emphasis should be solely on the vine. I mean, why isn't it called a married tree? But that we should think of these living partnerships as polycultural guilds with symbiotic and stacking benefits. In this episode, Erik outlines a syntropic approach to agroforestry and breaks down how this system works, whether you're growing cacao and coffee in Brazil or grapes in Switzerland and anywhere else. If you're listening to this, you likely have some appreciation for the importance of trees. But so much of our approach from a vitiforestry perspective is about how to integrate trees into our wine monocultures without hurting productivity. And sometimes we may even think and argue that we have to sacrifice productivity for ecological benefits. After listening to Erik present how syntropic agroforestry with vines works, I think you'll begin to see that not only is using trees the most productive way of growing vines, but that without trees, we will be handicapped in our efforts to farm with fewer inputs and to increase health and resilience. In this system, pruning functions almost exactly like rotational grazing and really takes regenerative viticulture to the next level, where we think of perennials as cover crops. But even that doesn't capture it exactly. You have to listen. This is a kind of viticulture that embodies succession, the ecological process that most of our vineyards fight against. And it looks at how humans become the regenerative partners we were meant to be in our communities. We dig into the details of vitiforestry and how to select the right tree to grow with vines. And we get into the myth of invasive species and even some of the ecological solutions for the spotted lanternfly. These are more tangential, but still really fascinating things. There's a moment in this episode in which Erik talks about how a tree responds when it gets pruned, and I got goosebumps thinking about what it would mean if we followed this example. And there's another mind-blowing moment where he discusses the ecological function of a vine and how vines may be the plant equivalent of a mastodon or elephant, and how that informs pruning and developing an early successional wine forest for their greatest productivity. I was excited about growing vines with trees before, but now I can't imagine growing them any other way. Enjoy. And Erik, welcome. Thanks for coming on to Beyond Organic Wine. I really appreciate you having this conversation. I'm excited.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks for reaching out, and thanks for having me on. I'm excited to chat.
Well, cool. Let's please just start by talking about you and your farm there and where you are in the world.
So where we are in a geographical sense is in the lower part of the Hudson Valley. We're in Ulster County. We are, I think, about a little bit under 3 miles west of the Hudson River. It's in Highland, it's close to New Paltz, for those of you who may know New Paltz. And we're on very low altitude, almost 300 something, couple of feet above sea level. Zone 6B, 7A cusp for growing zone, and the farm soils that we can get into later. And so, that's where we are. And this is Black Creek Farm and Nursery. We bought this piece of land 10 years ago now.
Okay.
And we started had started the agroforestry project before we moved here, before we even knew that we would be able to get a piece of land. So been involved in agroforestry for about 15 years, teaching and learning the whole time about permaculture and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then Black Creek Farm itself operates still as a commercial vegetable farm. We've been fluctuating between about 5 and at the biggest about 12 acres of vegetables in production.
Wow.
And significant. For a small, and depends on where your yardstick is. But for me, we started off with, a backyard market garden kind of thing. So it felt very big at its biggest to me. And then the nursery was really began to accommodate all the perennial plantings that I was doing, because it's very hard to afford to buy all of these plants when you're just buying them in. So we started propagating a lot, and then the nursery became more profitable than the farm maybe 6 years ago or something. And then so we've been sort of growing the nursery significantly more and then shrinking the veggie farm a little bit in the past few years. So that's more or less where an overview of this place. And
Nice. Yeah. No, that's great. And it's funny. I mean, I didn't know that I knew you, but I'm growing some of your nursery stock here
cool.
at my farm in Spencer at the Wine Forest Farm.
That's awesome.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just wondering what stuff to, like fruit trees and nut trees and.
I think I got your some walnuts, some
Mhm.
Carpathian walnuts, some hazelnuts, some I forget what else. There were well, I got the Mayoga ginger,
Oh yeah,
um,
right on. Hmm.
and prickly pear because I'm like
Cool.
I'm a huge prickly pear evangelist, really.
Yeah.
I think it's. I mean, we'll see. I hear that. I think my expectations for prickly pear in this climate might be a little overblown. I hear it stays pretty small and doesn't fruit that much because of the cold, freezing winters. It sort of dies back and then regrows every year. But
Yeah, I think it definitely will live and multiply, but it'll be probably a pretty slow rate depending on which way you're
right,
facing and whatnot. But
right,
yeah, that's
yeah,
cool. I mean, we've tried to basically kind of grow everything that you can grow, but then over the years try to narrow in on things that like work and that you get yields from without, having to be super involved. Certain things are like, yeah, you could try growing apricots, and the number of times that you'll actually harvest apricots is probably not going to be too many around here unless you're really, really doing a lot of fiddly work to make it happen.
right. Gotcha. Yeah, and so have you always been engaged in agriculture in this way in agroforestry? I mean, you said 15 years before that.
Yeah,
Were you like a student or were you what was
yeah.
your life like before
Um,
getting into all this?
yeah, yeah. I grew up with, we had gardens and fruit trees and stuff like that, but it was not a farm. We just, gardened for fun and things like that. So I had a decent background that way. And then I went to I've always just been like a very outdoors life centered person, like the living world centered person, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah.
And um, so then I went to college for biology, and I focused on like neuroscience and then some ecology, and I took some ag production courses at that time and like ag ecology, and that was really interesting. And then I did a master's in natural resource management, and I got to through the masters work with some indigenous groups of people who manage land. And then I went on well, actually before my masters I went to southern Mexico and worked just random, not through any program, just like met some people and worked with them, indigenous folks, in a totally very ancient form of agroforestry, the milpa system.
Oh wow,
um,
yeah. Oh,
yeah, it
how
was
fortunate. That's
that
so
was
great.
totally amazing. And it's like I didn't know almost anything of what I was looking at or what I was doing at the time. This was like I think I had just graduated from college and was sort of like, yeah, I was just like helping them whatever they were doing. Like we would cultivate the milpa, we would plant some coffee trees, harvest coffee, whatever. Um, and it didn't dawn on me until years later that I had even been in agroforestry systems. It's kind of like, duh, but it was the transition from forest to production space was so seamless that if your eye wasn't keyed into that, you just didn't I just didn't really know. I was like, wow, we're just in the forest harvesting this coffee. Like, I knew that it had kind of been planted, but it was so natural-ish that I didn't appreciate that the whole thing was a system.
Right. It's like it's so integrated, yeah. And
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like I mean, you mentioned permaculture. It seems like this is one of those ancient systems that actually predates permaculture and inspires permaculture, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken, right? Like,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, permaculture is wonderful and it ties together so many different systems and patterns. And this is one of those patterns that's, an agroforestry system that goes back for thousands of years, that is really extremely rooted in a certain place and climate and culture. And yeah, there's so much nuance to it. It would probably take a whole lifetime to get the gist of
yeah,
the depth of the patterns. And I did get to go
yeah,
back there later on after having learned much more and felt suddenly all the patterns, or many more patterns, popped out to me, having had learned a lot in the interim.
That's great. I mean, just for somebody who isn't familiar with the Millpest system, can you give a sort of brief
Yeah.
description?
Yeah, the way that they did it. So these folks were Zapotec, and
Right.
it basically, you think of a clearing. So there's a clearing in a forest, and this is a man-made clearing. The trees are felled, and they actually did not burn the material. Some places burn, some places don't. They didn't burn the material. They left most of the material on the ground. They used some for firewood. So this is cutting down an area. And then they would plant annuals, so corn, beans, squash, tomatoes, peppers, chilies, all kinds of flowers. So there's a couple of years of annuals, and during the time, sometimes in the year of planting annuals, they also planted in the bananas and coffee and lumber trees and avocados and citrus and all of these different things that essentially would kind of piggyback or mimic natural succession, so that in the first couple years they would grow corn, and then after the fifth year the bananas were really putting so much shade on, and the coffee plants were up a little bit, that there's no more space for the annuals. And so then it becomes banana and coffee, with the avocado and citrus creeping upwards and the lumber trees creeping upwards. And then after a while, even the bananas would be thinned out or come out, and then it was sort of like overstory of wide variety of trees, including some fruit, some nut trees, some lumber, and then a shade-grown coffee. And that system would persist for several decades, more or less in that same configuration. So it was sort of like
Hmm.
a 30 to 50 year crop rotation, because at some point
Amazing.
that stuff would all be felled, and that would be the new patch, and then a renewal of the annual system. So it was this really, and I didn't know much of any of that the first time I was there. I sort of didn't know what to ask or what I was looking at. And yeah, so it's a very long term crop rotation, cycling of different plants with different life cycles. Yeah.
And it seems like you could start, I mean, like if you're in a large regional landscape view agricultural system, you start, one of these every year. And so they're all in
Exactly.
different stages and yeah. And so
Yeah, and it's a
you always have,
mountainside, so you
right,
see that
right. So you always
patchwork.
have,
Yeah.
that's amazing. That's so
Hmm.
cool. I mean, I talk a lot about this just in relation to wine, about how, just the idea of a vineyard as this like thing that will stay the same forever, for
Hmm.
generations is not something you find in nature. Like nature has this
Yeah.
successional thing, and like how do we replicate that in our agriculture of, how do we have a process versus the stagnant thing which essentially just puts you up against what the world wants to do, what the land wants to do. You're just like constantly fighting to be the same,
Absolutely.
while it, like, you pushed over the first domino and then you're like, wait, I don't want
Yeah.
anything else to fall.
Yeah,
Like, and the land's
exactly.
like, well, you know what, like,
Yeah.
then why'd you push over the first domino,
And then even
um
at the end of at the life cycle of many vineyards, then they try to just take the old vines out and plant the same one again, and
right.
then
Right.
you get replant disease, and it's such a clear signal that the land is just like, no, don't do that again. You can't,
Right, right.
not here. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's so cool. I mean, it's so many things about modern agriculture. That's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
successional thing. So, and how does that tie into? I'm jumping ahead because I know you then sort of discovered something as you got into this. You discovered, you've been doing some agroforestry, you've been doing your nursery and farm there, and then you sort of found out about syntropic agriculture. And
Yeah.
I wonder if you like, does that relate in any way to what we just were talking about, or like, how is that different? What is that?
Yeah. It does for sure relate in a deep way. I had heard about I heard the word syntropic agriculture in when we bought this farm, and the first planting I did here was sort of inspired by like the tiny shred of information that I had seen from like a 7 minute long YouTube video about some guy who did this crazy thing, and the whole idea that really inspired me was the high density of planting, the different layers, the idea of a sort of a formalized or a systematized, systematic food forest where you
Hmm.
have different crops that need different levels of light and different then they can work with each other, which is really similar to the idea of the guild in permaculture, the layering of the food forest. But then
Right.
it went it did feel like it was really deeper than that in how it worked with succession and rhythmic cycles of disturbance in an annual agricultural year, of like pruning at a certain time to favor certain aspects of the system, usually the crop species, and and then working with succession in the similar way that I had been sort of piecing together with the Zapotec people, which was really, it doesn't stay the same throughout the life of the planting. You're working with a crop that's an annual, and then it transitions into a biennial, and all the while your main crop that's going to be there for the long haul is there growing alongside the annual, and that if you manage them in a way, in a specific way, that all of them can benefit from that, and nobody, no part of the system has to lose because the other ones are there. In fact, there's all these benefits that compound. But when when I tried my first planting of doing that with such little information, it sort of it didn't work very well at all, because I just didn't know. You know, you set yourself up for these. You set yourself up in these systems for things that have to be managed quite a bit and in specific ways. And if you don't know anything about that, you get to the point where it should have been managed, and things start not working, and you just say, well, I guess the system doesn't work. You know what I mean?
Mm. Yeah.
And so I got lucky enough to later on um, go and learn directly from Ernst Götz, who's the guy that really, I mean, he formalized this system, he created it, um, and get great many of my questions asked, and figure out. I feel now enough to really be implementing these systems in what feels like a more coherent way, and is beginning to now sort of, starting to feel some of the functionality of those systems come to bear, and that's super exciting to me now. So yeah, it's been a very big shift over towards pretty much at this point all of the agriculture that I do, I see in that framework, and I work with that framework. And it's still going to be some years until I can feel confident, like, hey, we have a system here that works. But that's what I'm working towards now, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the way you described it to me, or one of the things that you mentioned, was this sort of the idea of entropy versus syntropy.
Yeah.
I mean, can you mention that? Can you?
Yeah, for sure. So that's what the word comes from. It's the opposite of entropy. So we know entropy, maybe remember from physics, where we have an increasing disorder or a tendency towards disorder. Um, we all know that when you leave kids in a room for a while unattended, just stuff is everywhere. You can't walk, and just the general randomness increases, and the the level of order of arrangement just goes out of the window. And taken to its ultimate form, that's the cold dark universe theory, where all the elements of the universe are just randomly strewn about, and there's no complex molecules left. Everything is cold and dark. The cold dark universe theory. Anyway, um, so you
Right,
can think
right,
of like combustion is when you take a high energy molecule, you break it into pieces, and it liberates energy. That's an entropic reaction. It's liberating energy, and you're ending up with simple components. Whereas a syntropic reaction would be one that takes simple components and it brings them together to add complexity and to increase the potential energy. So one is sort of like, you can kind of think of like photosynthesis is the ultimate in taking little molecules that don't have a lot of energy, adding in the right combination of conditions, and creating this glucose molecule that, like, it's added complexity, it's added value. um, and so to have a syntropic system, the idea is that the planting that you do doesn't rely on external energy. It doesn't rely, other than the sun, of course, it doesn't
right.
rely on external fossil fuel, fertilizers, water, that we're not paying for our plantation by robbing some other part of the world. And the idea is wonderful, essentially equivalent to a zero input agriculture.
Hmm.
Um, and another way I like to try to explain it is to say we all know that if you walk away from a piece of land, anywhere you are, natural succession begins to happen and fertility builds. And so you can leave that piece of land for 5 years, and then you come back, you burn the forest down, and you grow your crops for a few years. It's fertile, and then after a few years, it loses, quote unquote, its fertility, and you have to let natural succession do its thing again. And so that rest, that fallow period, was like the basis of all agriculture before synthetic fertilizers. And it's sort of like, can we grow crops while natural succession is also happening? So, like, can we get the benefits of that fallow period while we're growing a crop? And Ernst Gutsch had cracked that code and successfully done that, which is like, it wasn't just, that's what attracted me so much, is that it wasn't just an idea. He did it, and he had the yield data, and he had the soil building to back it up, and he knew the actual mechanical aspects of how to make it happen rather than just at the idea level, which is where I felt permaculture had left me like, this is awesome, but where are the real permaculture orchards or permaculture vineyards that are really doing it? There's, a couple examples, but not really at the kind of level that we would hope of production across the country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's do you have any of that data or anything just to give people like a
Yeah.
tease of what and so I mean essentially you're saying this is you are being productive while also getting the benefits of as if you were taking it out of production. If I was
Even more so. So
even more so.
Ernst, yeah, Ernst's planting, you're accelerating natural succession to the point where Ernst's older plantings, they recycle 6 times the biomass of a nearby natural succession that is in the same soil. So, because he's doing this huge annual pollarding on a lot of his trees, so a lot of
Mm,
biomass is going to the ground every year, and that wouldn't happen every year in a natural system. You'd have maybe like a big storm every once in a while where branches fall to the ground and they turn into soil, but then nothing to that level happens for several years. In his systems, it happens every year. And so he
right.
gets really a lot more organic material cycling, more soil building, and his production of cacao. The trees are planted at the same density as his conventional neighbors who spray and, use fertilizers. His production is fivefold of their production.
Wow.
It's unbelievable. And cacao is a crop sort of similar to grapes in the Northeast that very few organic producers, because it's a very disease prone crop, right? We in the Northeast, we don't have many organic acres of grapes because there's too many diseases and pests. And so, the crop is physiologically, or certain types of vines, certain
Right.
hybrids, certain species that are well adapted to the area physiologically. But if you don't do the pest and disease, you're not going to harvest good quality grapes, or maybe any grapes at all. And the idea there is, we all know that when you're going to raise an animal, for example, you need to put that animal in a condition where it's not feeling a ton of stress, right? Like if you put big black Angus cattle out in the hot sun and it's 95, they're stressed out and they do not put on weight, they don't do well. And so we have to look at the ecophysiology of the plants that we're growing and put them in a context that's much more like their evolutionary context. And that could involve a certain level of shade from above, certain types of neighbor plants that they associate well with, and certain cycles of renewal and pruning that happen nearby that give them a boost at a certain time of the year. And that's when they would naturally have their good crop year, right? And so trying to figure out not just like the soil and the aspect and the topography and all of that, but also the consortium of plants and the management system that really benefits that crop. That was a big eye-opening thing for me, especially not just grapes, all kinds of crops, but for grapes, which he and his son have done a lot of work and have successful vineyards where they have implemented their system. So that's what was so exciting. And that's why I got into this great project in the beginning.
That's amazing. So, all right. So I'm super excited because you're touching on all the things that like are blowing up my mind right now.
Hmm.
But before before we jump to there, so the cacao that he's growing, this is like, and the coffee, it's like shade grown. I mean, this is a like an agroforestry system. So this isn't like
Yeah,
a plantation where they're clearing land and destroying forest. I mean, maybe originally they do that, but they're regrowing. It's a system that is meant to have increased photosynthesis and stuff like that. So this is like a, the fact that they're 5xing the production
yeah,
seems to suggest that like the way that we are destroying our world, like coffee and cacao, two of the largest causes of deforestation, could
hmm,
actually be better grown and more productive if we just looked at it purely from an economic standpoint
absolutely.
as an
And
agroforestry system. I mean, so that
yeah,
like, yeah,
and he's already proved this and shown exactly the path of how to do it, to the point where when he started, and this is all, what's so cool is that it's all recorded. When he started,
yeah,
he bought this farm that was a real dump. Like the extension service there was like, you can't grow cacao on that land. The pH was 3.5 to 3.7, unsuitable, not suited for cacao. It couldn't, it was abandoned pasture land at that point.
yeah,
And so he decided he didn't just plant cacao right in that place that couldn't grow cacao. He started to grow a forest with no input. He didn't use, compost even. He didn't use synthetics, no organic fertilizers, no sprays. And he basically started with the way natural succession would, with like super rowdy, fast growing trees that can grow in super degraded conditions. Many were exotics. And so here it would be like, you're starting with impoverished soil. The temptation is to just bring in a ton of compost and ameliorate it. And, it's not that that's illegal or bad. It's just
right,
that
right,
he didn't even have access to that stuff because we're talking really rural Brazil back in the 70s and 80s. And it just wasn't even really practical.
right.
Um, so he just did it with the natural force of succession, including all these like really fast growing vigorous trees, paying for it by growing annuals and then bananas, and the whole time just pruning, putting all the biomass on the ground, building soil, huge amounts of biomass that helped create the change in the pH. He's brought it up to 5.5 and 6 in some areas, and now it's well regarded
Wow.
as like I said, I keep saying this stuff is all recorded, so it's not like, and then I had to go and see it for myself to really understand. And it's just a full-on multi-level forest now. There are trees that he planted 40 years ago that are, 150 feet tall. There's Brazil nuts, and so there's these different strata. There's like a few trees that are way high up, then a bunch of trees that are lower than that, and then below that is all the cacao. So he has these ratios of the trees way high in the top in the full sun are about 20% coverage of the area. Then the next layer down, which is immediately above the cacao, is like covering 40% of the area, and then the cacao covers 80% of the area. So the cacao is planted at like commercial density, but they just have this other shade above them. But the shade is dynamic in that those trees that are above the cacao are pruned every year down to 95%. So they're almost completely stripped off all the regrowth and vegetation, the branches, and then the cacao is almost in full sun for part of the year. And that system of renewal is something that carries over to
Uh,
his system for grapes. And
right, right.
yeah, and
Great.
that pruning dynamic is part of what really builds the soil. And yeah, if I don't know if you want, we can kind of get into his
Yeah,
the
what
reason. Yeah,
absolutely. That's a
yeah,
great
yeah.
segue. I just had one final question about that
Sure.
system. Did he were are animals part of it in any way? Like
So basically not. They did raise some
amazing.
animals many years ago. They raised some animals, and he said he would like to do he it's not that he wouldn't have them, he just doesn't have the time and bandwidth to do it right now. Um
Right.
they can do some of the management really well if they're included at the right time, in the right density, for the right duration. But he just
Right.
doesn't have the bandwidth to manage that right now. But yes, he has designed many systems that do include animals to do a lot of this pruning. Hmm.
Amazing. Okay. So great. Now you mentioned, yes, like this perfect transition. You're talking about how the pruning actually facilitates the growth of these other things.
Hmm.
And the obvious version of that is like you prune, and that gives lots of sunshine to the crops that are growing around the trees. So you prune the trees, and now, like, if we're talking about a vitiforestry system, the vines have
Hmm.
this extra dose of sunshine. But there's more going on than that you
There
have
is.
helped me realize.
Yeah.
And this also leads into what trees you might select for a vitiforestry system. And
Yeah.
and and so if you want to talk about that and why that is, I'm so fascinated by this. And
Sure.
this, yeah.
Um, so one of the things that I think has really held up uh, it's held up the migration of syntropic systems into North America is the temperate versus tropic thing. First, there's this thing that's like syntropic. It sounds tropic. It sounds tropical. He's from the tropics. Uh, so that's just a etymological random. It has nothing to do with the tropics. He invented all of this. He's from Switzerland. He invented it in a temperate climate. Started with a lot of the ideas in the temperate climate, happened to move to the tropics. The systems are more or less the same in pattern and conceptual relationships, whether it's the Arctic or the sea or the tropic. That doesn't matter. But then in the tropics, there's this sort of well trod path. Like he has developed this system that works really well for certain crops. And then in temperate regions, just have totally other crops, and we don't know exactly how to relate those things. So I was really psyched to learn from him some of the details on some of the temperate systems that he's designed and built. And it so happened that his son, Tunket, he went back to Switzerland for a good chunk of his life. And when he was there in the Ticino, which is southern Switzerland, border with northern Italy, he did
Yeah.
a vite maritata system, which is um, this whole idea of the vine growing on a living tree. And this, as you may know, it dates back to the Etruscans, probably before the Etruscans. And it was commonly used in that time. There were two main systems for growing grapes. One was the Greek-inspired system, which is low to the ground on dead posts, dead trellis, which has become obviously by far the predominant system. Although there are
Right.
some systems where they're grown on no post at all, right? Just freestanding vine.
Right. Right.
And then in higher elevations, generally, areas that were more disease prone, more frost prone, they would grow. The Etruscans developed this living trellis system where the grapes would be grown on the trees, but in a pretty tidy agricultural system. And it was also called cultura promiscua, which is like growing
Promiscuous
all
agriculture. Yeah.
promiscuous, yeah, like growing a whole bunch of different things all in the same place. And that's part of the trend that we always see of like these really nifty, diverse, fluid systems, traditional systems that were flexible and resilient, sort of giving way to these vast monocultural, industrial, very rigid systems. Um, and there's a lot of
Right.
reasons why Vite Maritata doesn't really exist too much anymore. Um, and partly it's because we just have access to these cheap fertilizers and sprays and can just overcome all the problems by brute force. And it's
That's,
like the
yeah.
problems that we face by not including natural succession or including all the support species or the trees that the vines need. We just overcome that with fossil fuel and brute force and chemicals. So that's a bummer.
Yep. Yep.
uh, and so, as far as what trees, so the way I was told is depending on the site, they use different trees. And in the lowlands, where, lush soils, steep soils, they would often have poplar as the main, the tutor tree or the mother tree or the support tree. So one grape or two grapevines would be growing on a poplar, and they had all different ways of pruning these things. They could be pruned at 40 meters, really tall with two tiers of grapes growing on them and alleys of rice in between in Campania, or they could be pruned to just, 12 feet and one tier of grapes. They could have the festoons where the trees are super widely placed and then vines are sort of like almost decoratively hung in between, like, you see like the wire between telephone poles kind of thing.
Yeah.
So many different configurations. In one could be rows, they could be in a grid with the vines crossing both ways. Many different yearly patterns where sometimes the grain, winter cereals were grown in between, sometimes animals were grazed in between. So a very, very flexible, very broad spectrum. And so those were the poplars in the lowlands. And then as you went up the hillside, it would be elms and ash and maples. So those were the different ones that I've read about. And so in my trial, I'm trying all of those, yeah, all of those, and a few other ones that they wouldn't have had there. I'm trying some sycamore as well, and potentially a little bit of
Oh,
sassafras.
fun. Yeah. Well, I'll just say, I mean, there's several things I want to look at here, so many questions. But one of the things that, I should just say my approach to this was looking at this from the perspective of, companion planting, like guilds, like
Yeah.
we were talking about, which is also why, and I've mentioned this to you, I don't like the term married vine anymore. I've kind of stopped using that, or vite
Hmm.
martata, because it's like all the emphasis is on the vine. It's like the tree just becomes the altar that we put our idol on, kind of thing, is
Yeah.
the way I
Yeah.
describe
Yeah.
it. So I like thinking of it more as like, companion planting, guild planting, like the Three Sisters kind of vibe, and
Hmm.
equals and equal beneficials, because but I mean, obviously a lot of people, a lot of the folks that were growing these were thinking of the trees more as the supporting roles. And I was looking at it like from mycorrhizal perspectives, because this is one path that I had been proposed to me, and it sounded really great about thinking about, you know planting based on association. So like nut
Yeah.
trees tend to be different kind of association than vines, and so there might be a competitive aspect there. So I was, I've been considering more like fruit trees and things that have the same arbuscular
Hmm.
mycorrhizal connections as vines do. But you also brought up, to me, there's quite a few other things to consider besides just like what's going on in the soil. Like, and one of those things are these pulses of fertility that you get from pruning. And because of that, like, you need a certain level of growth from the tree so that you
Yeah.
can get those pulses, so that you can prune them regularly and hard and still get regrowth. And then not only are you getting the pulse, well, and I'll have you describe this, but not only are you getting like the droppings of whatever you're pruning off, that woody fungal, profungal, mulch,
Hmm.
but you're also getting actual, you know, pushes from the tree in through its roots, exudates and
Yeah.
things like that, energy given down into the soil. But there's also the other thing that you made me really aware of, which again, I just feel like this is me like swimming and trying to learn to swim while swimming.
Hmm.
Um, the idea that, of course, you have to, there are the practical considerations of like the flexibility and strength of the tree to withstand a load of grapes. Like,
Yeah.
you need something that actually isn't like a, and so that, so if you want to talk about some of how that comes into that. But one quick question before going into those deeper discussions:
Yeah.
I elms, ash, these things that are very, traditionally popular. I mean, we have an issue with those now. Like, they're all dying here.
Mm.
Um, do you? I mean, what do you do about that in our area now that we're losing the elms, we're losing the ash, and
Yeah. I mean,
are those viable
I'm
options
certainly
anymore?
not going to use any ash because we have, I mean,
Right,
the area that I've been working with to plant my vine system, all the ash are completely dead. There, like there's a
right,
few that are stump sprouting, and that's just, it's not, probably not viable. Although I will say, with heavy pruning, ash is actually, you can keep ash alive for a long time because the borers don't go in the wood until it's about 7 years old. So through this, like, increased vigor of the pruning, you actually can kind of. I have some ash that are been pruned a lot and are healthy and still alive. So,
Huh.
um, but
Okay.
I don't necessarily. I wouldn't try to push that. For us, elms are actually pretty good and happy down here in the Hudson Valley, for the most part. So I will definitely be using
Okay.
those.
Great.
But from my perspective, just because the literature that we have and the information that I've had told to me about this is from Western Europe, um, I just think of what are the characteristics of the trees or even shrubs that might be good. And then you just open your eyes, you walk around nature, and you see what trees are grapes growing on a lot. They're pretty promiscuous. They grow on a lot of trees,
Yeah.
but there
Yeah.
are there are certain ones that really very seldom have grapes on them. So like I grow a lot of catalpa and I love catalpa. It takes pruning really well. It's a vigorous tree. I wouldn't use that one because the shade that it casts is so thick, it grows
Yep.
so fast, and I
Yep.
very, very rarely see any grapevines growing on catalpa. Almost never.
Yep.
So you look around and see what are the ones that really what are the trees that support grapes a lot, and then you winnow down. Okay, I have to see it. If it's a tree that we don't know about, and you want to look and see whether it's a good idea, like does it have grapes on it naturally? Yeah. Okay. Good. Does it take pruning well? Is it structurally strong tree? Um, and then how long of a life cycle does it have? A friend of mine, Sean Dombrowski, actually, he runs Edible Acres very close to where you are,
Yeah.
and he has grapes growing on a cherry. It grows really well. He has them on autumn olive, which he really loves. I think autumn olive, it's really strong. It's flexible. It could support grapes, but it may be more difficult from the management phase because it's sort of a multi-stem shrub, and then the pruning
Right.
cycle. If you're trying to prune grapes as with spur pruning or something like that, if you have a system for pruning grapes, which you'll need some kind of system for the grape cane, whether you're doing cane pruning, whatever, you need some system to renew the grape wood. If that's growing on a bush that's like too rowdy to prune really fast and effectively, then it's not going to work if you're trying to commercialize the production. So you got to think about the simplicity of the pruning as well.
Right. Yeah. I've got grapes growing vigorously on spruce here, but
Huh.
it's sort of, but it's sort of like a row of spruce, so they can grow up, the sunny side, basically.
Right.
Like if it was a forest, probably they wouldn't like it. But
Right. Yeah. If
yeah,
it was a closed canopy, that would not be
yeah, because
ideal.
I have some sections on my property that are like all hemlock and white pine, and there's
Hmm.
zero vines in there.
Yeah,
Um,
that doesn't seem like their favorite associates.
Right, right. Um, that's really fascinating. So, uh, specific question. So, like, you know, I think about things all the time, like these invasives. Like, so you just mentioned autumn olives, which
Hmm.
I mean, people call them invasives. I find them to be, lovely on my property and,
Yeah.
friendly. I mean, obviously, I think the argument could be made that they're not the resource to many of our bugs and things like that, but like maybe that will
Yeah.
change because it's just so new and
Well, of course it will change over time. I
right,
mean,
right,
there's nothing's impervious to
right,
evolution.
right,
Evolution always wins. But there's everyone has to take their own yeah, you kind of take your own path on that one. I just simply over the years I've the more I find the people who really work with these plants, um very few of those people who really end up having a relationship with these plants can see any of them as villains over the long haul, because
right,
if you actually look really closely, you'll see that they're being interacted with by all kinds of animals and plants and fungi, and it's just
right,
almost impossible for me to believe. And there's always okay, under this certain kind of invasive, there's really low biodiversity. Well, a good friend of mine, Dr. Erik Kiviat at Bard, went and sampled some of those diversity indices under native trees, stands of white pine, stands of other things, and there's the very low biodiversity under a closed canopy of white pine. But no one ever
right,
uses that as an argument against it's not like, that's a
Right.
terrible plant. So that's like, these things aren't necessarily arguments in and of themselves. It's sort of, I find the vast majority of the time people come to the discussion just looking for a reason to hate this plant because it fits into a narrative. And then, I mean, even ecological papers and stuff like that, there's a lot of the time they're so biased and it's just weird.
Yeah.
And I would say many or most of the invasive plants are usually in the early succession to mid succession. There's very few like climax old growth um, invasives. And that's probably because we have just totally messed up the disturbance regimes. We've added in like all these erosive forces on the landscape. We're the ones, causing the wounds of that are being, repaired by a lot of these plants. Like I have the one I love is like the ailanthus. Everybody hates
Right.
ailanthus.
Yeah. I was
And
just
I
gonna
read this
ask.
paper.
Yeah.
You're like, why does ailanthus do so darn well here? Well, it turns out that the native arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi very much favor ailanthus over almost all the native trees. And that's why they grow so well. And for me, I'm like, you can publish whatever science and whatever paper you want, but I'm not going to believe you as much as I believe the arbuscular mycorrhiza. Like I don't think they're making a wrong decision. So anyway, that's my
That's
take
funny.
on it. And
Yeah, I mean,
I
well,
wouldn't
that
feel
was the
too
one I was.
bad to use them. Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly the one I was going to ask you about. So, the Tree of Heaven, for anybody that doesn't
Yeah.
know it by the other name, yeah, I mean, it's it's not a mid story, is it? I mean, it gets to be a full, like full, canopy tree, doesn't it?
It can be really
Overstory.
tall. The thing is, it's in the syntropic jargon we would call it an emergent because it really does not tolerate shade very well. It needs to be in full sun to thrive. And
Ah,
so, um, in the early stage of succession, it can really dominate and grow and put a lot of biomass out and put tons of exudates into the soil, by the way. 70% of its photosynthate can go right into feeding the soil. What an awful guy. Um, and and so after the next round of succession comes up and the ailanthus starts to receive some shade, um, it really starts to fade out of the systems pretty quick. So you'll see ailanthus solid on the roadside where there's a disturbance regime, and then
right.
you go 50 feet into the forest to find the next ailanthus. It's not there anymore because
Hmm.
that forest isn't as disturbed. There aren't as many openings, and it doesn't do well in that. So it's sort of like, not every time, but a lot of the time, they're the repair crew that come and roadsides
Right.
are not indicative of what's really going on in the forest. So anyway, the invasive stuff it's a pretty big other discussion. But
Yeah.
also keep in mind, if we're talking about viticulture or agriculture, um, your goal here is among other things to actually produce a product. And most of the grapevines that we're bringing in are hybrids or non-native. Apples are not, virtually all of our crops, with a few exceptions, are brought in. And most people are pretty happy when wild apples go feral. That's not a bad evil thing. So
Right.
we
Right.
enjoy
Right.
that one.
So, I mean, the only caveat I will say about the Atlantis is it Alan? I thought it was Alianthus. Anyway, I have
Atlantis. Yeah.
Atlantis. So the Tree of Heaven is the spotted lanternfly, which is
Yeah, I
also
don't think I would
a
use
vine pest
Atlantis. Yeah,
with a
I don't think I would use
vitiforestry system.
Atlantis for a grape.
Right. Right.
Seems like a bad move at this point. Yeah.
Till we figure out till our predators evolve, adapt to
Which
the
they did
the
even this
lanternfly.
year when they came. There was already bats eating them. Like
Oh
it's
yeah,
gonna
yeah. I saw the bats eating them. Yeah,
yeah, it's gonna happen very
that's
quickly
great.
that they'll figure it out. But yeah, and I have grapes growing here already. I'm not a producer of grapes yet, in a couple of years, but the grapevines that I have been growing, where we harvest a lot of grapes, I saw some spotted lanternfly on them. It didn't cause me any issues this year, but that's the whole beauty of these systems where you have the right support trees and you create the right niche. Spotted lanternfly, for example, is a hemipteran. It feeds by sucking sap out. Hemipterans can only digest free amino acids. They can't digest complete proteins. So if the grape is getting synthetic fertilizers, getting pumped with nitrogen, it's uptaking free amino acids. It is bug food. Its sap is bug food. If it isn't getting those things and it's being fed by processes in the soil in a natural way, the sap is inedible to sucking insects. So for me, sucking insects tell you exactly how far off from optimal your system of giving fertilizer or fertility to your plants is. And I've observed that directly in my vegetable fields where when I fertilize heavily with manure, I get a lot of sucking insects. If I did it, in a few applications, put too much on. Whereas when I feed with grass clipped from the side, if that's my fertilizer, which I'm developing that system, there are no sucking insects in any of my vegetable crops. It's you read about it
Wow.
in the book, and then it happens in real life, and it is really confirming when that happens.
That's amazing. Yeah, thanks for saying that. It's well said.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the other one I was going to ask you about, which is not, I mean, maybe it's invasive for some people, walnuts, and
Mm,
I mean, you seem like the kind of person who could speak to whether or not this whole idea of allelopathy is way overblown or a myth, or or if
yeah.
you've observed it, or what's the deal with that? Like, because I mean, for me, it's like I actually have a few vines. There's a few species, a few varieties of hybrids like
Yeah.
Baco and Marquette that I think might do really well on a walnut because they're so vigorous. Like
Hmm.
you could let the tree do the work if it actually does inhibit growth at all. It would
Yeah.
actually save you a lot of work with a vine like Baco or Marquette, which like way over vegetative, can be out of balance, and you have to do a ton of work just to allow
Right.
to prevent excessive shade and or excessive like shoot growth and stuff like that. So I don't know. Those are my
Yeah.
thoughts.
So with the allelopathy, you asked a lot of things, and I would say pretty much yes to all of them. So yes, I have observed black walnut allelopathy. I
Okay.
also think it's overblown,
Okay.
and I also think it can be overcome, or I know it can be overcome. So black walnut is a phenomenally vigorous tree. Once the root system is established, it takes pruning as well as any tree. It can grow 12 feet. If you do a big cut on a big branch, you could see 10, 12 feet shoots coming out that year. Um,
Yeah.
when trees are pruned, when trees that have high levels of allelopathy are pruned, their allelopathy drops a lot. And that's
Oh.
part of this system that we spoke about with pruning. Like you said, it doesn't just put organic material on the soil, it also sends all kinds of biochemical information through the soil. So when a plant is pruned, it needs to regrow. That's the main thing. Is you do a thinning cut or a heading cut, and now you have more root than you have bud, or you have more root per bud. Um, and so if you only cut that one time, sometimes people think that when I prune off a third of the tree, a third of the roots die. There's really no evidence to support that. If you repetitively stress a tree by pruning it too frequently, you can kill some of the roots. But if you prune off a third of a healthy tree, there's no root loss. In fact, all that root just feeds a smaller number of growing points more. And so, one of
Mm.
the things that trees will do when pruned, or almost any plant will do when pruned, is it now needs to regrow. And so it starts giving much more of its energy reserves to the mycorrhizal fungi. And it's sort of counterintuitive, right? You would think
Hmm.
this tree has been pruned. That means it's not photosynthesizing as much for the next little while because it doesn't have as many leaves or as many shoots. So it's probably going to be more stingy with the soil. The dead opposite is true. It needs to grow a lot. So it mobilizes its reserves, which it either has in its leaves or its trunk or its shoots or its roots or all of them. And it feeds that. You can look at this in real time, the percentage of exudates going to mycorrhizal associates and fungal associates increases up to the maximum that the tree can handle, sometimes 70%. And basically, this is saying, hey, I just got cut. I need to regrow a lot. Here's a whole bunch of sugar and proteins, and I need all the minerals and water that you can give me so that I can grow back. And when that happens, the desire and inclination to produce very expensive allelopathic compounds drops off as well because it needs to focus on growing. And so
Mm.
when you keep allelopathic plants pruned really well, the allelopathic effects drop off significantly. So the other thing is if you have a black walnut that you're growing a grape on, there's really no way for you to not prune that walnut because the grapes are going to chase up to the top of the tree. You know, with an established vine, the grapes are going to chase up to the top of the tree in a year or two, no matter where it is. So if the tree is now shooting, you know, if you kept some tall branches and now it's shooting and you've got 20 feet of black walnut up into the air, the grapevine is going all the way to the top.
Right.
And okay, maybe that year it's going to set the fruit at 10 feet, but then the year after that, what are you going to do? You're not going
Right.
to,
Right.
so you
Yeah.
have to bring, just like a vine, you can't just plant a vine and let it grow every year. You will get, crazy vine patterns and very sparse and sporadic and fruit because you now have too many buds for the same size root system. You have to balance that like number of canes and length of canes and number of buds to the root. And the same thing goes for the tree. You have to prune the tree if it's going to be your trellis. You have to bring it back down. So I believe all that to say, I think if you use black walnut and you were to not prune it and you were to just let it grow and have a grape on it, it could produce grape for a few years. And then just like we see in nature, the grape production is going to drop off to very, very, very low, and the grapes are going to be out of reach. And so you would have an allelopathic effect there. But then if you're pruning it a lot so that you can access the grapes, I think you're going to get rid of most of that allelopathic effect and you're going to actually potentially get some protective effects because walnuts have a bunch of antifungal stuff going on as well.
Right. That's amazing. Yeah.
But putting a vigorous vine on the walnut still makes sense to me because it's good to match a really vigorous vine to a really vigorous tree like a poplar or a black walnut, I think.
Right. Okay. So it could, I mean, but it could also backfire. You could be like goosing the vigor in some way,
Yeah, but it's
potentially.
like it's almost one thing that these pruning systems have really rid me of is a fear of vigor. In fact, it's just like the more vigor, the better for me. With all the plants that I grow, I love seeing crazy vigor because then it just means I prune more and I build more soil faster.
That's such a good thing. I mean, the other thing, honestly, I got chills as you were just describing the way plants react to pruning, and
Mm.
like when they have need, they like reach out to their community in the soil.
Yeah,
And,
that's
I
what
mean,
it is.
yeah, and it's like, I mean, I don't know who needs to hear that, but
Yeah.
if you're cut, there that plants might have shown you the way.
It's so
I mean,
true. You would think that they would draw inwards, and they just don't. They reach outwards.
yeah, and it's. I mean, I think I've heard about this with like we know about this. Anybody that's in like rotational grazing, right? Like
Hmm.
the grasses, the same thing. Like the grasses regrow. I mean, like that's like part of the magic of these systems of rotational grazing, which is like you
Yeah.
will you just by grazing them responsibly, you actually increase the vigor of the grass and the root
Yeah, very
mass and
much.
everything. Like, yeah, the root
And
mass
you prevent
increases.
the senescence of the grass, right?
Right.
If you let that grass go to seed, it slows the soil down and it can almost turn off the flow of exudate and food to the mycorrhizal sphere.
Right. Amazing. Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's amazing. What about, I mean, you brought it up, and this is an idea that I've been toying with because, I mean, you know, uh, I know that we have been sort of toying with some grapes for thousands of years, and so they might have adapted to our human, our human cultivation of them.
Yeah.
But, you take Labrusca, you take Riparia that we find around here.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like they would, if you didn't prune a vine, it could come to a balance on its own. Have you looked into that or explored that idea at all? Like that, not pruning to and yes, it's going to go through a phase of like overproducing, having too many buds, and therefore,
Hmm.
there's like you have the smaller root mass for too much or for too much fruit, and so you just aren't getting what you need. But then will that ever come back to the vine saying like, hey, I need to reproduce, therefore I need to find some level of, making tasty fruit within my own limits.
So I I would be very happy to be wrong here, but my inclination is that that won't happen because when we
Okay.
look at natural succession and we think about the function of the grape in the greater scheme, the function of the grape in the ecological sense is yes to be a source of food, yes to provide leaves for caterpillars to eat, and a million other things and whatnot. But in the big picture, we have grapes grow well onto certain trees and not other trees. And more than the species, it's usually the stage of life cycle that the part of the life cycle that that tree is in. So we see not all the time, but the trend is usually towards grapes and most vines growing up senescent trees because there's a little bit less vigor in the canopy of the tree. Maybe they're having a problem, and the grape can sense more light, so it goes up through and it gets up into the
Mhm.
canopy. And after several years of being in the canopy over the tree, and the tree is senescing even further because now it's getting less light. This is a system for nature to get the senescent trees back onto the ground and let succession continue on. And so the job of the grape is the same as the job of that the elephant would have had before, which is senescent tree. I'm going to rub my head on it, and one day I'm going to accidentally knock it over. And when it
Mm.
not gets knocked over, what happens then is there's more light to the forest floor, and the next round of trees that have been waiting in the shade can pop up and succession can continue on. And so I see that in the wild, when grapes grow up into a tree, they they're not that interested in fruiting. I very rarely do I see, like, high up in the canopy, a big massive grapevine covered in fruit. Usually that fruiting happens earlier earlier on in the grape's life cycle, when it has, some smaller number. So in the vineyard, we're trying to replicate, and we are a little bit fighting against natural succession. We're trying to extend that period of time where the grape is young and vigorous and shooting up the tree for the first time and putting out tons of fruit. And then we're trying to prevent it from getting to that point where it's already given its fruit and now it's going to take the tree down with its weight. That's sort of the way the way I see it. So, like, it's the same thing. Like, I mentioned harvesting basil a lot. It's like, if we let the basil go to flower, um, its life cycle is short, and if we keep pruning it, we can extend that life cycle and extend the production of new shoots, and we get more basil out of the single plant. So by this idea of, like, renewal pruning on the grape every year, we're just extending the young vigorous phase of that grape. And yeah, if you cut down a big tree that has grapevines all over it, you can see that the grapes are also very senescent usually. I just felled a big apple that was nearly dead that had grapes all over it. And 80% of the grapevine is all dead and brittle. And so, yeah, there's a responsibility to keep, for a producer to keep the plants in a state of vigor through pruning.
Got it. That I've never looked at it that way. I've never even heard that. I am fascinated now by this idea of like a vine as an elephant or
Yeah.
mastodon, maybe in North
And this
America. um,
this is something that Ernst shared with me. So this is an insight that he's had after a whole
huh.
lifetime of watching, and the see and once you see it, go and look, and you can see that the vines lock many trees together, and then the trees get weighted down, and then when they fall, the next thing that pops out of it, it's like clockwork. There's a stand of sumac, which is early succession, short life cycle. The grapes grow up on it. The sumac senesces. The grapes have locked all that colony of sumac together. They fall down, and then boom, there's the ash. There's the oak. There's the elm, and they come right through. There's the pear
Right. Yeah.
or apple, and it's like early succession. That's the transition. That's the inflection moment to early, to late secondary, heading towards the climax species. So the grapes and any vine, the bittersweet, whatever, they're facilitating that transition. It's beautiful.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I always see them on edges too, like the forest edge, because they have that
Hmm.
whole photosynthetic, palette all the way from
Yeah.
ground to the canopy. But that's really
Yeah. And
interesting
you'll
to
see them too in
see
like
its
once
role
there's a
in
patch
succession.
clearing,
Wow.
then, you know, when trees fall down and there's all these branches sticking up on the ground, birds love landing on that in like a thicket that's regrowing after a tree falls. And of course, they just ate some grapes and they plant grapes on that, so they'll
Yep.
seed grapes, new grapes into the patch. Um, but yeah, so it doesn't seem to me that you would have a low prune, high production grape system very easily. I would love to be wrong and see examples. I haven't seen any yet, but I'm all ears.
Yeah. I mean, but this is definitely fodder for thought and for observation and what, yeah, I'm definitely going to be paying attention to this
Yeah.
a lot with new eyes now that you've brought that up because that's so fascinating.
Mhm.
I love that. Thank you. Yeah, I don't know. So, I mean, do you want to talk about the project that you're doing there and what you're actually doing?
Yeah. So the planting system that I have is there's a couple different things going on, but the main one is there's rows of vines. It's similar layout to a normal vineyard. You know, I have 2 meters between vines in the row, and then 4 meters between rows. So pretty tight.
Okay.
And at each one of those spaces, there's a mother tree. So I've got, poplars and elm and willow and sycamore and yeah, whatever else. And so for now, I've planted those mother trees and a few other support seeds that will be coming up, like annuals, biennials, and some nitrogen fixers on either side of the rows. I have like a nice deposition of mulch, really probably 8 to 10 to 12 inches thick of mulch on either side of the row, with the center of the row
Amazing.
just a little tiny bit of mulch, almost down to soil, just a little mulch. And so that's a really good structure that, it prevents any weeds from entering into your row because the grassy space between the rows I can mow with the sickle bar really easily. Um, and yeah, I'm going to be doing sort of like closer to rotational grazing with those grass strips, not like mowing with a rotary mower every week. It's going to be more like I'm going to plant very vigorous grass. Maybe like in the first year, it's rye and orchard grass and a few other things that'll grow really vigorous. And I'll wait until they get knee high, waist, whatever, half to your waist, and then cut them and then use that as mulch on top of the wood chip. So anyway, um,
Yeah.
the row will have these trees. They're going to develop for this coming season. So they're already planted, and then in 2026 they're all going to grow. And this March, March of 2026, I'll be rooting all the grapes. So I already have a few of them, and I am going to need about 400 total vines. So I'm going to root all those cuttings this March and let them grow in a nursery bed for 2026. And then in the fall of 2026, each vine will be planted right to the south of each one of those trees. My rows are oriented north south, which is what I would normally want to do. And full sun to the east and full sun to the west and the south. So you can do whatever. I planted chestnuts to the north because need you don't need light coming. You don't get light coming in from the north. So um,
What do you think about chestnuts as a vine tree?
also good. Also
Yeah,
good.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean,
Oh, I mentioned
heavier
before.
shade probably, but
Yeah, I
yeah.
mentioned before that Ernst's son Tankut, he has a vineyard or had a vineyard. He since moved back to Brazil, but he had a vineyard in the Ticino, and you can look that up if Tankred is his name, and if you look up Tankut Gutsch Swiss winery, you'll find some information about him. They produced award-winning vines with higher bricks than anybody else in the region on his Vitae Maritata system. So it's the model that I'm working with is a proven thing. spacing is a little bit different. We'll see how that works. And so anyway, the management is going to be, the poplars are going to be let to grow for 3 years or so. They're going to be up 18 feet, and then they're going to be pollarded at like about probably 6, 7 feet, maybe 6 feet. And I'm going to leave branches, lateral branches that are sort of more or less in line with the row. And so it's sort of like you think of a post with a wire going across the top, except the post is a tree and the wire is branches. And then so the vine will come up the trunk, and it'll be espaliered. So you'll have a cordon on either of the branches. And then it'll be, I probably will be doing spur pruning, although some varieties that I'm going to have respond better to cane pruning. And so the pruning system is going to be more or less the same, except all dormant season, late March, before the bud swell of the grapevines, all the dormant pruning will happen. And then the season will consist of the tree pushing huge shoots up. A poplar that's established can push dozens of, 12-foot shoots into the air. The grapevine will initiate buds right around when the poplar does, and they'll chase them up. And so there's no summer pruning. You just let the vines chase the tree shoots all the way up, and much of the fruit will be set around the main branches, and some of the fruit will be set higher up. So harvest will be the big question mark. How efficient is that? You're going to have to be at least partly on a ladder. That's
Yeah.
something I think a lot of vineyard people would just be a hard no, and that's okay. You could lower this whole system down. The reason I want it higher is to evade some of the fungal issues that many growers have by keeping the vines close to the ground. Part of the whole thing is just you have them higher off the ground, and you evade some of those. You get more drying, more airflow, a
Yep.
little bit more distance from some of the spore sources, and
What
yeah.
about
So I'm gonna
frost protection?
yeah, a
Does
little
that
bit of
matter?
frost protection. I don't know if that'll matter for me. I mean, if you're
Right.
choosing marginal varieties, then it's super important. Um, but
Right. Right.
so, and this is all malleable. If I'm not liking how that's working, I can lower. I can lower the whole system because the whole thing is alive. You can cut and get new branch. You can induce new branches wherever you want them on the tree.
That's the
Um,
magic. Yeah.
yeah. So it's
I
like
like
it's malleable, and another. So that's half of the planting, and then the other half of the planting, I'm gonna leave the trees to grow a little bit taller, have more space, and have bigger trees and bigger vines. So I'm gonna be trying in a number of different ways. One is pretty um, closer to approachable for like scalable, and the other one will be a little bit more. Sort of like a old another one of the systems that I've seen, like kind of like with the festoons. So you're it's a little bit wilder, it's a little bit harder to imagine it being commercialized, so I'm going to do a little bit of both.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I don't know if you've looked into the willow trellis system or have any thoughts about that. Have you?
No, you were the first one to tell me about that,
Oh
so
yeah, yeah. I
yeah.
mean, I saw it in action in Wales at Hebron
Hmm.
Vineyard. I mean, just anecdotally, of course, there's no data on this yet, but they planted identical blocks side by side on the same hillside,
Yeah,
one on willow and one on post and wire, trellis,
awesome.
and the willow already, I mean, it's like 4 or 5 years in, was like clearly more vigorous. Now, of
Hmm.
course, there's all kinds of things that can account for that, but I mean, at minimum, it's not hurting the the vines. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
at minimum, just you can look and see like the vines are totally fine. In fact, they might
Yeah,
be better than fine, and they might be better than their neighbors that are on a traditional trellis
and they
or
might
what
end up
what we
having
call
more
traditional.
resilience too, because
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, and the trellis system was cheaper. There's all kinds of things.
Right, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
they literally just like, I mean, and quicker to set up. I mean, they
Yeah.
just, I did a little video where he just talks about it. And he's like, I just go down the row, I lay out all the, I have all these wisps that I just pruned out of the coppice grove,
Yep. Just put
and
them in the
then
ground.
I pound a spike in and then stick it in the ground. And it's
Yeah.
done. Like, ta-da, I bend
Yeah.
it over and tie it to the next one, and I go down the row.
And
He's
then it
like,
builds itself.
right, exactly. Yeah. and it's like, the complexity of pruning and all this stuff is like you're going to be pruning the vines anyway. So like
Yeah.
you just
Yeah.
make a few extra cuts, with the
Yeah.
trees. Like
Yeah,
it's
and
not.
I get when, commercial growers are probably not gonna just jump into this because they know that, an extra 20% pruning is a big deal. But,
Right.
if this system can do what Tankert's system did in Switzerland and obfuscate the need, prevent the need of fertilizers and pesticides through this kind of management, then to me that will be a revolution. I've been, like I said, I've been at agroforestry for a while, and I never really thought of planting a vineyard or planting a substantial planting of grapevines because I was just like, those are too hard to grow in our region because of diseases. The grapes grow vigorously, but if we can overcome pests and diseases in a systemic in a, a systematized way, that will be it will be so important. And so that's why I've devoted considerable space and time and effort to trying this project out. And the results will be in a couple of years, so we'll know we'll know something
Yeah,
more.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's fantastic. And you're, if I'm not mistaken, primarily eating grapes, not wine grapes. Is that the system now
Yes,
that you're
yeah,
working
we're
with?
going
Okay.
to be doing primarily table because that's just a marketing thing. Because I mean, I'd love to grow wine grapes, but I'm not a vintner myself. I don't think I will become one in this lifetime. My dad is a pretty good winemaker, but he doesn't really want to start a commercial winery. So if you're not doing the wine in house and you have to sell to someone else, then we would have to really be, it'd have to be a single, it'd have to be a really good, well marketed thing to say, because you'd have to get value out of the fact that we're
Yes.
growing the grapes in this totally different way. Can you
Yes.
guys pay more for the grapes? Or, maybe they could make it on contract and whatever. And to me, marketing is not my strong suit. But what I can say is if I have really blemish free or good looking, really nice, sweet table grapes that are organic and not sprayed, I will be able to sell those for $5, $6 a pound, no matter how many I grow. I guarantee, like, that's easy for me. I can just go to the health food stores in the area, the nice grocery stores, the farmers markets. If I can grow 5,000 pounds, 10,000 pounds of those grapes, we'll sell them. And so that's very easy. I can just do it direct. That's within my wheelhouse. And so that's
That's
why I'm going
amazing.
that route.
That's
Yeah.
an incredible value too. I mean, that's more than you'd get for wine grapes for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. I mean,
Uh,
you go to the store, go to a place that has organic grapes from California. You're not going to see them for less than, maybe not less than $5 a pound ever, And
yeah.
so that's
Wow.
like wholesale from California. Um, if they're marking them up by 100%, they're probably getting 250 a pound to the producer. If it's local, if I'm doing retail, I can get six. If I do a little bit small wholesale, I can probably get three. That would be really good money for me because grapes can be pretty darn productive.
Yeah. That's amazing. Wow.
So yeah, that's the
That's it.
plan.
That's it. I'm switching over to I'm transferring out of wine. Screw wine.
It is
No,
exciting to be, because now I'm getting down to like varieties and all of that, and that part's pretty exciting. Like I said, this is my first big foray into the world of grape production, and it's in a very different way. And I simply wouldn't have done this if it weren't for finding or being explained this system. And so
yeah.
it's one of these things where it's like I'm not making this up. There is a really good foundation here, and the system has been proven elsewhere. But of course, the Ticino is very different. I mean, it's somewhat similar, but it's a different climate than what we have. We have a harsher winter. We have
Right.
a different economic reality, and so
Right.
I'm not jumping in with 5 acres or anything like that. It's modest, but it's substantial, and I think it's going to give us an idea of, okay, maybe this thing just works really well, maybe it's a flop, maybe it has wings but needs to be done in a different way. And so At least grapes and all these trees grow really fast, so we should we should have some answers in not too many seasons of growth. So it's
That's
very exciting, and it's an honor to be to have the capacity and the land and all of that, and the ability to, or the chance to try to put it into practice.
Yeah, and to be like the first person trying this in North America, really. um,
Yeah, there may be other people, but I would love to meet them if there are.
other than you and me, I don't know. I
Yeah.
think there might be there. I mean, I know there are people sort of doing backyard versions, but
Yeah,
um,
exactly. There's a lot of backyard versions and a lot of good ones, but going from backyard to anything commercial, there's always a lot of stuff to be learned.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, are there any resources that you recommend people look at? Any quick things that are like great agroforestry resources, or where you got some of the information data that you have mentioned?
Um, yeah, so I am gonna have to send that to you. I
Great.
have
Yeah, that's perfect. Yep, I'll include
yeah,
that.
there's that one, there's a PDF called Piandata Veneta, I think. It's like the
Yeah,
Venetian plantation, and that's
yeah.
all in Italian. That's got a lot of information on some of these systems. And then there's this other website that I can't remember. It's an actual vineyard in Italy that kind of collated a lot of these systems, and they've got really cool pictures and explanations. And I'll send that website to you. And they
Okay,
are one of the several vineyards in Italy that still produces this way in a commercial setting. So
great.
it does exist out there, and they say the same stuff. It's like harvest is really tough because you have to get people on ladders, and that makes it very expensive. But we're not spending as much on sprays, so that's awesome.
Right.
Um, and
Right.
so we don't really know how it's all going to shake out yet. But for me, it's exciting to be heading towards a lower or zero input agriculture, and I think that's important. No matter what, we have to try to achieve that as fast as we can. Really,
Yeah. Great.
yeah.
Well, thank you. I mean, this is super exciting. Thanks for this, Eric. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to checking out more of your podcast episodes, learning more from you, because I'm going to have to get into some of the nitty gritty on grapevine production that I don't yet know. So,
Awesome. All right.
lots to learn yet. But
All
yeah, thank you
right.
so much for having me.
Absolutely. Hey, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you joining in to these podcasts. If you'd like to support these podcasts, probably the best way to do that is to just join Substack as a paid subscriber at beyondorganicwine.substack.com. It also gives you access to all the paid episodes and other content that I will be releasing on Substack. And I also want to thank Colden Pro for this beautiful closing music.